I want to thank you all for attending this event today. This came about with the goal to help our team out on our legal negotiations and our legal analysis. But as soon as we started using this tool, I thought maybe it should have value to others across the state. So we do want to work to make it available for state agencies, and even if there's a need for other agencies, universities, smaller cities, towns, we could talk about doing that or what it would take to do that. There's lots of similar type of tools available. Ours, and as Andrea will tell you, is more tailored towards IT purchases in the state of North Carolina. So we designed it specifically for that. But with that said, I'm going to introduce for this month's statewide IT procurement monthly webinar, Andrea Pacyna.
Thank you, James. Today, we're going to talk primarily about AVA. We call it AVA, and it's an acronym for Analyzing Vendor Agreements. All right. Foundations for why we created this. A great IT procurement process protects taxpayers, provides security, keeps data private, and allows for best value. In doing all of that that's up on the screen, we have created an AI tool that we actually love right now. And as James said, we want others to know about it and to realize what its foundations are made of so you can understand how to use it in your own use and applications and agencies and entities. We seem to have a problem when we actually would have so many vendor agreements to either incorporate and work on. And our problem was we'd get these vendor agreements, and I was constantly training and other people training, how do we incorporate these? And so I did an awful lot of training on how to do this, because we would always do a draft incorporation before we sent it off to the real experts, the attorneys. And I knew that there had to have been a little bit of heartburn. Of course, I love terms and conditions and negotiating, but I don't think everybody did. So maybe a little birdie told James that this is not really our funnest thing to do, and it takes a lot of time because it's difficult for us. So James came up with a solution and an answer for us. And that was called he wanted to do an AI tool that would do this initial analysis for us, that would not make it so difficult to plod through these 26-page or 10-page or 3-page service level agreements, end user license agreements, master agreements, terms and conditions, of the vendors. So what is AVA? AVA is the acronym for Analyzing Vendor Agreements. It's an AI tool that allows the user to use AI tools to review vendor agreements in accordance with North Carolina General Statute and Admin Code. It's not a replacement for an attorney. It highlights and brings to the surface the areas where we typically, like our immutable terms and conditions, have to be reviewed to make sure they comply or comport with our general statute. This webinar is going to include details and a demonstration of how it works. Okay, why we created AVA? It's mostly to make it easier and quicker and more efficient for us to incorporate vendor agreements. Back in the day, when we did IT in the year 2000, or when NCDIT was created, we did not do this. And right around 2016, 2017, 2018 was the emergence in the embryonic stage of these vendor agreements. So that's where I tried to unify how we did things. So I have a lot of documents, and some of them I'll show you today. Legal and business analysis and decisions are needed in support of statewide IT procurement. The generative AI solution reviews vendor agreements to identify clauses within the agreement that are unacceptable, typically to us, as well as identify acceptable clauses that may require modification. It'll say, oh, this clause is in there, but we need to review the clause. All right, this application will accelerate and as you're seeing here, this was designed initially for SITP, but we're going to spread the love and let others use it. And I'll talk about that at the end of my presentation. And just note, and I said this before, this is Gen AI technology. It's closed loop, which means, to my knowledge, it's not going out and getting data or document. There's privacy review this as well as legal. You will only see your agreements that you work on, and it's the analysis of your agreements. Okay, analyzing vendor agreements, AVA. It's an idea that originated with James to streamline the specialist review. We then enlisted Ernst & Young to create a closed loop AI, Gen AI tool to assist in this effort. Relita Baker and Andrea Pacyna, I was asked to be the SMEs with EY. So we basically gave them our brain dump and all these training documents that I created for our statewide IT control contract specialists and strategic specialists. We talked days and days and days with Ernst & Young, and they were able to really streamline the tool, and it worked out great. It was time intensive though. And that's because these contracts are not simple, these vendor agreements. Okay, I can give you a demo of it right now. The way I learn is I kind of just want to see it first, and then I'll go through the steps. So I'm going to do a demo first, and then I'll talk about the steps. Okay, so here's the page, and know that it's really simple. What we have here are 4 tiles, 1, 2, 3, 4. Summary, identify clauses, extract hyperlinks, and this admin. And pretty much admin you don't even have to worry about because that's mostly Relita, James, and I. So, and to a certain extent, Ernst & Young. So here we have our summary. So this is the first thing we're going to do. I'll go through analyzing one agreement. I hadn't analyzed this one before. So first, what I do is you click on the summary tile. It opens up. Wow, that's really great. Okay, look. You could see some of the other ones that I worked on, and it's various. I worked on this one with DIT, this one with DAC, all kind of exciting things here. The first thing you do is you upload your document. And when I worked with Ernst & Young, I said, listen, we really want to be able to not have to have it just in Word. We want it to be in PDF form or Word or whatever way we get it, because we sometimes you have to convert PDFs into Word. And they said, oh, no problem. We'll allow you to do, upload PDFs or Word. So that was great. So this morning I added Absorb software, which was a negotiation I did years ago, I guess in 2022. So you click on your document. Okay, so all it does here at this point is puts it in the window and it says unsaved. But then you just click on, secondly, you click on upload. Okay, so look how you see this green bar. It says file uploaded successfully. Okay, so here's Absorb software. So notice how all I've done is just uploaded my document. Well, next thing I'm going to do is click the Analyze button. Okay, and this is where it's thinking. And there are times when I have documents in here and it's taking like 45 seconds. This one took a lot faster. Can you see the results of this summary? I think so. Looks good. All right. Well, here's one thing that I really liked about the screen is that you see the actual document over here. And it took us a while to perfect this with Ernst & Young. Sometimes it would come fuzzy. Again, I highly recommend you use Chrome. When you go into any other browser or supported browser, this will tend to be fuzzy. So I would recommend you use Chrome all the time. Here's what it does. The very first thing for this first tile is gives you the contract summary. And you're like, well, I kind of already knew what it was. But actually, when you read this thing, it really tightens up your grasp in 30 seconds on what this document is. Does it cover parts? Does it just cover software? Is there a warranty? It really tightens up exactly what you needed to know. A lot of our contracts, a lot of our vendor agreements are evergreen. Some of them have contract terms. You'll get a very good feel very quickly with this contract summary, which is generated via AI. Okay, and this one it says, well, it's a service agreement between Absorb and the person and it's a learning management system. It's a proprietary software. So you could go on and read this, but this is the results of the summary. Okay, then that's one tab over there. Then the second thing you do is you can look at the contract details. We told Ernst & Young what we kind of wanted to see, and it's churning and thinking here, and it's going to spit out some key components for us to give us a quick analysis of this vendor agreement. The agreement type, it's a general T's and C's. It's not a EULA, it's not a service level agreement or whatever. Here's the product. It's for only their software LMS. The service type goes on, effective date, not explicitly, initial term. And that makes sense to us because most of what I typically deal with in vendor agreements are evergreen agreements. They're not a solicitation, a contract. There's something that we attach to a contract as a foundation, but they typically don't have terms. And this being like you see here, not explicitly, makes sense to me. The renewal term is automatic for periods over 12 months. There's termination. What's the notice period and what's the survival of terms? So that's what you get in that first tile. So I'm going to go back to home, see how I click on the little house. And there we have, so that's what you get in your summary. The next part talks about identifying clauses. Okay, this is some of the intellectual property that we had created, I had created. I used to call it our cheat sheet in the procurement files, but I thought if we ever got audited, it may not look very good if we said something called cheat sheet. So I renamed it Summary of NC Statutorily Mandated T's and C's. Okay, and when I would work with agencies, I would say, hey, this is how I go through an agreement. And I would say, and you could read all this here, but the key thing that you need to take away is that vendor clauses that the state typically cannot accept, and we call them considered to be no fee, and no fee stands for no force and effect, meaning we don't want to go by your terms and conditions in these areas. We want to use ours because ours are explicitly written in our contract and in statute a certain way. And the ones that you see here, indemnification and so forth, are the ones that generally we're not going to accept yours. Now, I would say indemnification, like you really have to read that closely. But no one is supposed to indemnify us, and we're not supposed to indemnify others. You have to read that because it may actually comport with general statute, but here's the bottom line. Most of these do not, okay? So when Relita and I worked with Ernst & Young, we talked to them about this, and we said, hey, these are the things that need to be pulled out to see if they exist and if they don't exist. You may or may not know, but vendor clauses we typically accept or modify after review are vendors' intellectual property rights. We don't want to have derivatives churned out in someone's garage. That we won't do that. Patent, copyright, and trade secret protection. Warranty. Typically, we abide by the vendor's warranty as long as it's fair, and we look at indemnification and whatnot. And then the acceptance process, because of cure times, payment terms, that's a business decision by agencies, and service level agreements. So those are ones we typically accept only because if the agency wants to buy whatever it is they want to buy, they're most likely going to agree to the service level unless they want to negotiate something different, which they definitely have that latitude to do. So know that these are the things that we went through with Ernst & Young and said, hey, this is how we adjudicate our incorporate vendor agreements. So this tile addresses just what I talked about. So there's identify clauses. Okay, so I'm going to click analyze again. Now it's going to go through and say, do these clauses exist? And it will just say if they exist or not. It's not going to say, oh, it's good or bad or anything. And notice how long it's taking. There we go. Okay, again, you see the document on the right that you're reviewing. I'm going to put this over here. Okay, so here it's saying that there is an indemnification clause that exists, but is it unacceptable or not? It means, hey, I've got to go and look at that. Same thing with LOL. So they've identified that all these 5 clauses do exist in this contract, and we're really going to have to go through them or just allow ours to supersede when we're incorporating this vendor agreement into a document. This governing laws, jurisdiction, and venue, that kind of answers your question about governing laws based on the client's location, Alberta or Delaware. Well, of course, this absorb was negotiated in 2020 with, I believe, Eve Hens and Lauren Clemens. Took us a long time, but we did change the governing laws, jurisdiction, and venue. There's assignment, and there was a default and termination. Okay, now that was just one tab. Remember, these tiles have 2 tabs. So here's acceptable clauses. They're saying they exist, but to review them. And in reality, we're going to exist, but we're going to, and generally they're going to be unacceptable, but you're going to have to review them. Notice how there isn't any transfer clause, availability of funds, and audit clause. So if you're working on with our terms and conditions, are going to be great. All of these are automatically going to be the states. Transfer clause, availability of funds, and audit clause. Let me go over to acceptable clauses. And I reviewed those with you before. So there is an IP rights, which makes total sense for a training software. They don't have anything on patent, copyright, and trade protection, but there's a warranty clause. They have acceptance process and an SLA. So that's what your second tile will get you. Now I'm going to talk about the third tile. Okay, this was our favorite thing, and we were already pretty much done with designing the whole thing, or they were creating based on our, SME information. And I just said, it would be really, really great if you could extract the hyperlinks out of the document, because there are huge problems. Sometimes we get documents that have 7 to 20 hyperlinks in them, which means you got to find that hyperlink, you got to download it, and then go and analyze that thing. So they said, oh, well, sure, we can do that, no problem. Let me click on this link here, extract hyperlinks. So again, here's my Absorb software. You will see it here because I did it this morning, or when I was doing my test drive, but here's where I officially uploaded it. Now we're going to analyze it for how many hyperlinks are there. I think Cloudflare had a lot of hyperlinks. Let's go look at that one. Here's a great example. Notice how you can see the document over here, just to give you a grounding foundation. But then it has there are 12 hyperlinks in there. And what I really like is you could just go on here and click it and boom, it comes up. So there's some super advantages here, and I'm pretty excited about how it works. Let me go back to our home. So I click the house. Again, this is admin, and Relita and I just use this to approve licensors. We'll talk about how you too can get a license. Here's the about. I already reviewed this in an overhead with you. I think what is really neat is right towards the end, as we were developing this, it was Debbie Patterson that was really smart and said, well, did you have like legal look at this and privacy? And we're like, wow, it is a deliverable that I need to have. So I had privacy and legal look at it. And we have what you see here is a privacy policy and all that kind of information related to this AI tool, with a disclaimer. And as you all know, remember that disclaimer is that this is just a tool. You have to use your brain to go through, but it accelerates and expedites your review. And if you click down here on contact, that's James, Andrea, Relita. Okay, so let me move on to the presentation. The rest of the presentation is really kind of simple now at this point. It's a rehash of what I just showed you. I need to see it first, and then I could go through and we can answer questions. Okay, so before navigating to the Power App to request access, ensure all end users have the license and the SharePoint access. And we'll have this in the webinar, but Ashish Patel and actually Shaquan Harris will be helping you get your license. And I'll talk about how we're going to divvy those up and how long that lasts. It does cost something. It's $4.50 per user per month, or $54 per year. And James and I talked, and we already have later on at this presentation how we're going to have people use the license throughout the agencies for now, for starters. Okay, note, for now, the user must be an NC Active Directory, I believe have an NCID in order to gain access to this program. Okay, so again, what you have here is a summary of what I actually showed you. It's summary, talks about the actual agreement and summarizes it and what various key components are. It identifies clauses that is tied to NC immutable terms and conditions, and those are the typically we can accept. It extracts hyperlinks, and there's the admin code. Here's the key features and functions. I showed you how you go into this tile here and you upload the summary. And granted, you can use this webinar for your own training. We also have a training document available for you that Ernst & Young created. Pretty much all I do now that I have the app, I just created a bookmark, and that's how I click and get in. And it's very quick. Key features and functions. So you open up the terms and conditions, you attach the document. Remember, go in Chrome and you can upload a PDF or Word. Okay, key features and functions, it analyzes the content, showed you what that looked like. Here's what our vendor agreement analysis, this is that summary, and then there's the contract details is our next tab on that tile. There's the acceptable clauses, and you saw in my demonstration the unacceptable clauses. And then here's where you extract the hyperlinks, very useful. Additional details, mentioned this already, PDFs and Word docs are acceptable to unload, and that's a gift in and of itself. And then use Google Chrome for best results. Okay, where and how to obtain your AVA license. As a pilot, statewide IT procurement will pay for one license per agency for 1 calendar year. We have an onboarding document here, which I believe is shared in SharePoint. I think, we'll have to get you access as you're onboarding. And then here's once you get the license, how I get to the analyzing vendor agreement tool. Okay, where and how to obtain your license. Before navigating, you have to request access for a license. I believe that we actually own the license, but Ernst & Young maintains it for us. Procure the necessary license by contacting Ashish Patel. And again, you could see the pricing and that you have to be right now an NC Active Directory, which I believe means you must have an NCID. Okay, and here it is, the end of the presentation. There's my email address. Let's talk questions. And James has a question. Oh, James, did you have a question?
Yeah, so there's some discussion about how to use the AI data and, confidentiality, how that works. I'll talk a little bit about how it's set up. So it's set up by our team at NCDIT. We have a closed loop system. Our team, the model is in our unit. The data isn't shared outside of NCDIT. Ernst & Young's not able to go in and pull any of that data out. They just help administer the program for us. That's some of the things that we had reviewed. The purpose of the tool isn't to give legal advice. So in the beginning where it gives a summary, that's one thing to recognize, that it might only be 80% accurate. It depends what you determine for accuracy. But the purpose of the tool isn't to replace our attorney team. The purpose of the tool is for us as a purchasing team or purchasing folks to look at documents and see where we have issues. And I think that summary did well enough in itself to say, oh, there's something here with the jurisdiction that might not agree with North Carolina terms, where the jurisdiction we know should not be Alberta or Delaware. Most purchasing folks know that or should know that. So that's the purpose. What we noticed during COVID and for items that are under our delegation is that when contracts a lot of times start out under our delegation and then they come to statewide procurement, and then when they came to us, we noticed that a lot of them we were agreeing to other jurisdictions and in other countries and in other states. So the reason we want to release it to agencies is because we don't want to have the same issues where we have a lot of contracts that are under negotiations where we're agreeing to things we really shouldn't agree to, like the laws of Alberta, things like that. So what we're trying to do is help you identify the issues that you might have. And it also helps with us because if we can identify these issues and solve a lot of them before we send it to the attorneys, it doesn't waste the attorney's time on these issues like jurisdiction that we could probably work out ourselves ahead of time. It doesn't replace the review by an attorney, but we also realize so a lot of smaller agencies and even the larger agencies, nobody has a just unlimited ability to have attorneys review documents. So what our goal is to give our legal team, when they get to review it, something that is much closer to being correct than what we have done traditionally. And we're looking to catch those big things like jurisdiction, like where's the data being stored, things like that. So we're not relying on it to be necessarily 100% accurate, just like a procurement person reading the document might not be 100% accurate. But we're trying to catch as many of the issues as we can before it goes to further legal review. And that saves time, because if every time we got to go back and forth with the vendor, that adds time. But if we can get all the easy issues out of the way, and then the attorneys can just focus on the 2 or 3 critical issues, we're that much closer to an agreement. I hope that helps explain, Blake, some of the questions you have, because I can't say it enough that it does not replace the legal review by your attorneys, but it should help us give the attorneys a much better document.
All right. Michael
Sure.
Perry said, will it identify what DIT or vendor terms are business decisions? And no, it won't. What it does is go through what we know are standard immutable terms and conditions and ones we typically accept. And then because there's so many things that could bubble up to the top that can be a business decision, I mean, I can't say, well, this particular item is a business decision or not. Now, when it comes to in my mind, SLAs, and warranties and whatnot, yeah, most of those questions, unless it's a legal situation, would be going back to your agency business owner and asking, is the warranty of just 18 months okay, or do you really want 24? Should we put 24 in there, or if you're, going back and forth on that? So no, it does not. We currently just have the immutable. We know what the immutable terms and conditions are in accordance with general statute. And remember how I showed you that cheat sheet? What I call it the cheat sheet. It's a very terrible name. I'm going to bring it up and share with you. I think Blake had a question on this. If you go into our terms and conditions, you can see exactly for each one of these what general statute is being referenced for every one of these. So if you want, it'll say availability of funds, and it'll have NCGS, blah, 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 blah. You could go in there and open that up in our terms and conditions and see exactly which general statute these all are associated with. Okay. Someone probably asked, can you see other people's agreements or whatever? No, it's just your little areas has your information in it and what you've analyzed. In theory, though, it's not like there's confidential information per se, outside of the fact that, hey, I'm Andrea Pacyna and I looked at Atlassian's end user license agreement. That could be considered confidential info, because if a lobbyist wants to know, wow, are they negotiating? That would be something that is confidential. Okay, Joyce Young asked, can we submit vendor agreements in advance of key? Oh, absolutely. I think that's part of your market research that you could do, is to upload different vendor agreements and see which one are going to be problematic in advance. Great question, Joyce. Okay, Elizabeth Cass wrote on 116, do we need to notify the vendors that we are putting their offers, proposal responses, T's and C's in this program? I don't think so. But that's just my procurement assessment. We may want the attorneys to say, do we need to have disclosure on that? I don't know. It's not because it's like the final way that we adjudicated and incorporated their vendor agreement. We're just using it as kind of like an initial screening tool, and then it goes through the rigorous review. But I don't know.
We can definitely ask our team about that, because yes. I don't think everybody, I say everybody, but the use of AI tools like Microsoft Copilot is pretty standard now. So I don't think that, I haven't seen anything that said we have to ask permission to use Microsoft Copilot before we use it for an email, for anything like that. But it is a good question we can double check on.
Oh, Blake said, my question was more focused on summary statements from AVA that don't properly describe the document. How often are you seeing the AVA tool provide inconsistent answers like the one above, which said, based on the client's location in the first half, then either Alberta or Delaware in the second half? We all know that AI generated content may be incorrect. His question was focused on how often you are seeing the summaries to be incorrect. I have been using this for about, probably 5 or 6 months. And I use it just to the extent that I need to get what I need to get out of it. I'm not necessarily reviewing it thoroughly for their accuracy. So I don't know if anybody else is on the call that has been using it from statewide IT procurement, if they can answer, Blake.
Well, I will say that with anytime you use AI, no matter what the language model is, it will make mistakes, but it's also getting smarter every day. So our chatbot at statewide IT procurement, the first time I asked who was the chief IT procurement officer for the state of North Carolina, it answered Bob Blatchford, who helped us put together this presentation. But so it was incorrect. We gave that information to the development team, which is our internal DIT agency development team, and they were able to teach the model that was incorrect, and the model just gets that much smarter. So if you do see something like that, like we can take that and give it to the model, and it will help the model become smarter in the future. But realize, I always tell people that with AI, you're probably going to get B- work or B work or C work, but it's better than getting no review at all ahead of time. So, don't think that it's ever 100% accurate, because it's definitely not. But it generally gives you a good summary of what you're doing and saves you a lot of time by having to read through the whole thing. It puts you a little bit ahead of so you know what to kind of expect.
I would totally agree with that. Joyce wrote, so if they don't have the term, and that's why I pulled this up here on the screen, if they don't have the term, will our state terms be in effect? And absolutely. And you're going to have to negotiate these. If like you could see here, there's no transfer clause, no availability of funds, and no audit clause. Well, that's great. That's one less thing. Our terms and conditions were just much more comprehensive, and that's one less thing we don't have to worry about. But if we're negotiating with the vendor, they may not say, well, I don't like your availability of funds. I want that out. And we'll say, no, we can't, because we have to live, towards the budget. And, we have certain cash flow requirements and whatnot. So yes, generally, I'd say if it's not in here, if you don't see it in a check mark, that means ours can be the governing clause. Good question, Joyce. Okay, James said we've got good questions. Elizabeth Katz said, following up on the question regarding notifying vendors if we're using AI to review their agreements, how is the information provided to the AVA tool kept confidential? Did we talk about that? Who has access to the vendor contract text? It's in a SharePoint document, which is not like Google related, right, James?
Yeah, so that is one of the questions we asked at the beginning before we wanted to release this. And you it's kind of like when you are storing your files in SharePoint, everything is segmented by what you have access to. So you can see your documents, I can see my documents, Andrea can see her documents, but we can't see each other's documents. And then everything is closed within DIT.
Yes. And Mike Perry at 129 wrote, if there are multiple types of terms for the purchase, do we upload each separately or combined? Now, do you mean like, if there's an SLA and then there's a general terms and conditions and then a EULA? Are you talking about that?
Andrea, did you ever show the links, how it identified the links? I don't think
Yes,
you did.
I did.
Oh,
in fact,
okay.
I can do that again. Absolutely.
So that's where you would get a whole lot of other agreements. So let's just
right
see.
Here. Oh, wait, Absorb didn't have any, but Cloudflare had a boatload. Let's go to Cloudflare. Cloudflare, yeah.
So every one of these links is a potential agreement that you might have to incorporate into the contract.
See.
Yeah, so each one of those would have to be done separately. That's the tough part. Of course, hopefully you talk with them and they're like, oh no, none of these apply, or only one of these apply. And then that limits what you have to review to incorporate into the document. Absolutely. I wish there was an easier answer there, but sometimes you see 30, 40 links, but a lot of times it's for different products that they're trying to sell.
Okay, and Jake, Jake put a link in there. Thanks for being here, Jake. I believe immediately applicable to the question at hand was the link, and he gave a little screenshot of it. When AI is used by the state, the use or agency shall provide notice to those who may be impacted by its use. Yeah, I guess the question here would be, is it being impacted at all? It's a starting point, but the end point is through attorneys and procurement specialists. But this notice should identify the use of an automated system, explain why it is used and how this use contributes to outcomes that impact individuals, and so on. I'm not going to read the rest of it, but Jake, that was awesome. Thank you for bringing that in here. I think that's something, again, we'll have to talk to the attorneys about, and heck, we may have to be adding another clause into our terms and conditions that says your vendor agreement or offer may be run through an AI tool that's confidential. Okay. Yeah, an agreement with lots of links. Joyce wrote, isn't that? Yeah, it's fun, and a bag of chips. Let's see. Blake wrote also only, Joyce said, okay, we covered that question already. And we had another conversation between Jake and Blake, the Jake and Blake call or note. What if there are, okay, I think, could agreements be shared across agencies that may be using the same product? Well, if there is a mutually agreeable vendor agreement, like one that's already been negotiated, we keep track of those. And then when someone comes in and says, oh, I want to go buy Veeam, we're like, oh, okay, we already negotiated the cloud version of Veeam. And to be honest with you, actually already negotiated the on-prem version of Veeam, but we have never been able to negotiate with their cloud version. So yes, we definitely allow folks to use and super copy our agreement. We don't want them to always piggyback because that doesn't create a very clean line for financial auditing purposes, but you're allowed to lift terms and conditions that have been successfully negotiated. Of course, we want to spread the love. So yes, the answer to that is yes. James, would you like to talk at all about any of the salient things that are coming out?
We are working to utilize a tool like this to write solicitation documents. And I say when we write them, you're not going to want to just use that as your final RFP. But if you could start with a RFP that's maybe a B or B minus or C, then it helps you get to a really end product a lot quicker.
Thank you so much, everyone. We greatly appreciate your time. And thanks to James for allowing us to have such a fun tool.